Welcome back. It's the Big Blue Banter, New York Giants football podcast. I'm Dan Schneider, joined as always by my co-host Nick Velato. We've got a little bit of time here. Nick's got to go soon. He's got to pick his parents up at the airport, so we don't want it to be that horrible son that leaves his parents waiting at the airport. I know a little bit about Nick's father, and I just have a feeling he's the type of dad that would be super pissed off if you left him waiting even for like a minute there. So we won't do that. We're going to talk a little bit, though, about the trade deadline today, the Giants making no moves at the trade deadline, and a little bit of what Joe Schoen said at his presser. So I want to start, Nick, by just going over some of what was available. And we can know that by just looking at the other trades that were made, right? Specifically at wide receiver here, we saw Chase Claypool be traded for a second-round pick from the Bears, though it is the Ravens' second-round pick, so it's not as bad. Obviously, the Ravens will have a little bit better.
I thought it was the Bears' second-round
pick. It ended up being the Bears. I thought it was originally reported as the Ravens. Okay, so that's even worse. So we got a big premium pick for Chase Claypool. The only other receiver trade, which was an interesting one, was the Calvin Ridley from the Falcons to the Jaguars, and they're going to get a 2023 fifth-round pick and then a conditional 2024 pick. But the cool thing about that for Jags is if they play this thing right, they can use 2023 as a rental year for Ridley. And if they don't re-sign him in 2024, they're going to get a comp pick back as long as he performs well with Lawrence, which I think he will. Or they sign him and they just give up a second-round pick, but they'll be happy because they get the Stephon Diggs bona fide wide receiver one type of play. So out of all the moves that were made for receivers, the only one that I would have considered would be the Ridley deal. But I do overall think I'm happy the Giants did not make that trade either, because Ridley is an older prospect. And if they re-signed him, it would be, close to his age 30 season for that 2024 season. Worth a second-round pick, but a little bit older. Otherwise, you can't really blame the Giants for not making trades when there weren't really players to trade for. You can name all these guys, Jerry Jeudy, but who knows if they were actually on the block or not? It's all speculation, and none of those players were actually traded except for Claypool and Calvin Ridley. And Claypool was the only one who actually helped him for this year. And I sure as hell wouldn't trade my second-round pick for Chase Claypool. I don't know about you.
No, I would not do that either. I'm happy with what Joe Schoen did. I know a lot of people aren't, or at least there seems to be a lot of people who aren't, but watch his presser and you just look at the way this man carries himself and the way he answers the questions. He is so well thought out. There is a real process here. He has a value for every target that he is going to pursue. And if teams don't want, it takes two to tango. If teams don't want to meet that value, then he's just going to pass it up, which I love. He's not going to overreact. The Giants are 6-2. Maybe they didn't expect to be 6-2 in the preseason, but they're not going to overreact and just go out and trade more than what they value a player for. And who wouldn't love that trait and characteristic in a general manager?
Yeah, I would. And I love what he said. He broke it down pretty clearly. He was like, guys got to look at the economics of this thing. He's like, right, listen, a lot of teams are still in contention. First of all, that's point one. Point two, a lot of players are injured across the NFL. So a lot of teams have a lot of attrition. Three, there aren't that many actual players to pick from this player pool. It's not like a draft. It's not like a free agency. It's a very limited pool. So he's like, all it takes is one team to outbid you and you're done. And you get past the point of what you think is fair value for these players. So that tells me they were in on some of these players that were traded or that were almost traded and didn't get traded. And he said it wasn't just receivers. He talked about all the positions. And he even mentioned, like, look, we want to upgrade our receivers. We don't want games like the Jags where there's a lot of drops. But he's like, I have some hope for Kenny Golladay, who they now expect to be back with, by the way, right after the bye week against Houston, which is interesting and definitely.
And he made a point of that too. He's like, yeah. I'm hoping that he's going to be back for Houston. I'm confident. I don't know if he said confident, but he was alluding to the fact that he expects him to be back.
Right. And so, as he said, man, the worst way to GM in this league is to be a hungry shopper. That's what he called it, a hungry shopper. And that to me describes a hungry shopper. Anyone who went into this market was a hungry shopper. Like Joe Schoen said, Nick, there were not that many players to pick from. A lot of teams are still in it and not trading players, and there were injuries. And so what did we see? We saw a team give a second-round pick for Chase Claypool, a player who, Josina Anderson reported there were off-field concerns with him. There's been growing concern there in Pittsburgh, and they've been looking to trade him for months now, similar to the Toney deal. And he hasn't really been that highly productive in my mind. He's a nice flash player out of Notre Dame. Like, he has size-speed combo, but besides those plays downfield, hasn't done much, and it's a bad quarterback situation in Pittsburgh. But I just think, like, that was an example of a hungry shopper there, the Chicago Bears. They traded a second-round pick for him.
But it doesn't make any sense. They might have been a hungry shopper, but he had 2 ham sandwiches they threw out the window with Robert Quinn and Roquan Smith. They were sellers, and then they bought Chase Claypool, which to me at least says, hey, we're attempting to give our young quarterback a weapon to work with. Because Chase Claypool, I think his skill set meshes well with Justin Fields, who throws a good deep ball and likes to put it up there, similar to like a Cam Newton when they had Kelvin Benjamin and Devin Funchess. You want those guys with large catch radiuses. They can just go up and climb the proverbial ladder, catch the football. I think Chase Claypool can do it, but it just doesn't really make much sense from the standpoint that they just traded two prime defensive assets away from their team.
Yeah, and it's a weird deadline for the Bears for sure. But hungry shopping is something the Giants used to do under Dave Gettleman, and we found ourselves in a lot of issues by being hungry shoppers. We were hungry shoppers when we used a supplemental third-round pick on Sam Bill that ended up being a top 65, I think top 70 pick. I mean, come on. No one even offered a fourth round. That was, we need corner. We need corner. Desperate. Get me a corner. All right, here's a corner. Let's do it. He might be good. You can't act like that. You have to have some patience as a general manager. It's a long-term building process. Yes, you're 6-2. Yes, you have a better chance than you expected to make a run make the playoffs and then maybe make a run. But that doesn't just mean mortgage your future to get something to help you win now, because that's bad planning. And I'm happy that he didn't do that.
So am I. And Joe Schoen stressed several times throughout his press conference that it wasn't just the last week that he was looking to get a wide receiver. Like the trade deadline was the deadline. They were talking to several teams of players. Some of these players who ended up getting traded or were in discussions to get traded, they were talking with those teams in the summer. It's just those teams never budged off the value that they put their asset at. So to go back, I really just appreciate how Joe Schoen carried himself as a general manager. And this is how I expected him to carry himself. He's really living by the mantra that he has laid out since he arrived here in New York. And it's very prudent. It's very well thought out, and it's very process oriented. And I think that's the best way to be, as I said a little bit earlier, when it comes to being an actual general manager of a football team.
Yeah, he wants to build it like they built it in Buffalo from the ground up, quote unquote. They draft a young quarterback. Maybe they have that already with Jones in their mind, but outside of that, they built a lot through the draft process there. And he even discussed with Peter Schragger on a podcast I listened to that was also from this morning that he really is happy about those 9 picks that he has. And I think it could even be more if they get some supplemental picks. I mean, some compensatory draft picks, which has been rumored to potentially happen. That formula is not a science yet, though some people predict it pretty well. We don't know for sure, but they have at least 9 draft picks going into this class, and that gives them an opportunity to do what they did this year: find a Bellinger, find a Belton, find a lot of these guys who can be role players. In Bellinger's case, he could potentially be even more than a role player. He could be like a 10-year starter potentially.
He could be, and also, yeah, he's been studding when he is out there. But also, it gives the Giants more trade assets during the draft if they want to wheel and deal and move up if they really like somebody. So there's never an issue in my mind when you go out and you have draft assets and you're a team like the Giants that, let's be honest, it's a lot better than it was last year. But there are still a lot of holes. The Giants are not one wide receiver away. They are not a Chase Claypool away from winning the Super Bowl or competing for the Super Bowl right now. I think it's safe to say. So you have a lot of holes on the defense still, even though there's still a lot of great players on the defense. The offensive line needs some work. There are some issues with the roster. 9 more picks, even if you trade up, if you don't, you still have 9 more players that Joe Schoen will independently evaluate and bring into this building. Look what he did with this draft. It's injury riddled, Dan, but holy crap. There are a lot of contributors here. Like he talked about that as well, I think, with Sean O'Hara, about how the Giants have one of the biggest impacts of rookie classes. I think the Giants are the team that have one of the most impactful classes. Now you could say, is that because they didn't really have a lot of veterans who were all that great? I think there's a little bit of validity to that, but look how guys like Daniel Bellinger have played. Josh Azudu, he is flashing. Wan'Dale Robinson when he's out there. Kayvon, Evan Neal. Like you can just go on it. And that's not even mentioning the 3 guys at the end of the draft who have torn ACLs right now. I contend, bro, Darian Beavers, that dude would be starting right now. If he would be the starter if he did not tear his ACL. I really do think that.
Yeah, and he also mentioned the undrafted free agents they got too, and the players who have been coming over from that. They've really done a great job grinding the back end of the roster and using young rookie talent. And so there's no reason to think that he wouldn't want to continue doing that. Like you said, giving himself as many dart throws as he can get at this next draft, especially when he mentions like we're going to be in a better salary cap situation. Because like part of what he said is they talked to some teams about some players, and that kind of leads me to believe maybe Brandon Cooks was one of those players, the Texas receiver. And he's like, it just didn't work out financially in our mind. And that makes sense. He doesn't want to bloat that cap again, because what he mentioned after that, Nick, at least in the interview with Schragger, was he feels really, in his mind, the way to build a roster is through the draft, but not only through the draft, but through extending your own young talent. He said, I feel fortunate that I did get to, and he's like, I did inherit a horrible cap situation, but I at least did get to inherit some young talent. He mentioned Andrew Thomas by name, Dexter Lawrence by name, Xavier McKinney by name. I thought this one was interesting. The fourth player he named was Julian Love. That I felt was very interesting. Then he came back, circled back a little and said Barkley, and then circled back a little more and said Jones. I think he just has to get those names in no matter what he's actually feeling there. Well, who knows if he's planning to resign them or not. And I thought Dan Duggan had a really good tweet regarding Barkley, where he's basically just like, listen to this answer from Joe Schoen. He's not trying to give Barkley's agent anything to work with, right? You don't want to give the agent anything like saying, this guy's everything to our team. He's integral. He's the reason we're winning these games, because then they can use that as leverage in these contract negotiations. He's a smart guy. He's well aware of that. But I did think it was interesting that he mentioned like he does feel very confident about some of that young core talent. Julian Love was mentioned, Daniel Jones. In addition to that, he also has talked about Daniel Jones's comeback drive. This was with the Peter Schragger podcast, by the way. He talked about the comeback drive against the Packers because he said Barkley was out of that game. And he said he didn't miss a single pass except for one throwaway. So I thought that was really interesting that he noted that drive from Jones as something that he thought was really good from Jones this season.
He always talks about he wants to see how quarterbacks and players specifically are going to perform in gotta have it moments. And Daniel Jones this season has performed very well in those gotta have moments. I wanted to ask you, who do you think the player was that Joe Schoen was referring to in terms of when he was asked, has any other teams called you on players? And he was like, yeah, there's one player, but we did not respond to it. We just didn't even entertain it because he's a good player. And then he wouldn't budge. I think that's probably Saquon, right?
Almost definitely Saquon Barkley, especially given the fact that, a lot of running backs were traded at the deadline. Christian McCaffrey was traded at the deadline. And I don't know if I would read too much into that as far as like that means he's definitely going to re-sign Barkley. It may just be more if we're 6-2 and we can't get rid of Barkley this season right now. But I think that was definitely Barkley.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. But I don't know. I always come away impressed every time I hear Joe Schoen speak in a press conference type of setting. I just
think feel that way with Gettleman.
I actually found Gettleman, and I'm sure a lot of people did, very entertaining.
He was very entertaining, that's for sure.
Yeah, that's something that you can't say he wasn't, because it was always a laugh when he was up there. But geez, totally different type of vibe when you get Joe Schoen up there. Much more of a forward-thinking type of general manager with an actual process.
I mean, yeah, he got us Andrew Thomas and McKinney. Good job. You had 17 first top 10 picks in however many years. Like, you're going to hit on some. You should. But look, Joe Schoen is a different kind of GM. He's not going to hungry shop. He's not going to mortgage his future. He's going to take a long-term view of this roster, no matter what the situation is, no matter how much the fans are calling for it. Because, again, a lot of what Dave did was fan reaction, it felt like to me. The Galladay signing, the Beal move, like there's just a lot of quick reaction. Let's please the fans. Let's please the majority of this whole thing and kind of the broader audience or the broader scope, rather than just do what's right and build the roster but with a foundation and stick to your plan. That's what Shane's doing. His plan was never to panic trade for a wide receiver because he feels like he needs a receiver. And he even said, we looked at other positions. I got to say to you, Nick, I can make a case right now that the Giants need an inside linebacker more than they need a wide receiver. And I'm not sold on that. I'm not saying that's my definite take, but I think it's certainly in the discussion. I don't subscribe to the whole these receivers are as bad as a lot of fans think they are, personally, from watching the tape. They're not good. They're certainly not great, except for Slayton, who's pretty solid. But they're not. They're still NFL guys. They're still running routes out there. And Marcus Johnson creates decent separation. He just can't catch the ball. I don't know. I just don't. Wan'Dale Robinson looks good out there. I don't know. It's just
Wan'Dale's not grouped into it. Wan'Dale's a long-term piece. Nobody else in the wide. I think that's what it is. There's nobody in this wide receiver room who is a long-term piece outside of Wan'Dale Robinson. Like Darius Slayton's not going to be a Giant next year, more than likely.
Maybe, though.
And I think he could be. Like, I mean,
I'm warming up to the idea. I like Slayton's game, man.
There's a non-zero chance that he might be, but Darius Slayton's also a player who was buried on this depth chart. No, he is frustrating, but like he's playing well right now. Like I'm pleased with what we're getting out of Darius Slayton, and he's getting open on some plays. But if you lose Darius Slayton right now, this wide receiver room is hard to even look at. And that's Darius Slayton we're talking about, someone who couldn't even skip the depth chart a couple weeks ago. So that's the state of the Giants wide receiver room. It's not good right now. It really is.
And I think that case could be made for the linebacker core. If they ever got somebody real in there at linebacker, then we'd see the difference on a week-to-week basis of having like a really good linebacker in there. I think we would see something similar. But it is what it is. They're going to look at all positions. They're going to improve all positions. I think D-line was one of them, especially with the Williams injury, just to get some depth there. But they couldn't find anything, and I'm fine with that because they don't want to mortgage their picks. They don't want to put themselves in a situation where they're trading for someone with a huge cap hit either, because they don't want to take on another bad contract. That's what this past GM did. He took on a ton of bad contracts, and that's why they're in the situation they're in now. Because even Shane said today, like, he doesn't feel confident This is crazy to say, dude, but he doesn't feel confident he can get through the season with their cap situation without restructuring another contract. He's already restructured Williams out of necessity. He's already restructured Dory out of necessity and desperation, and it's not his fault. It's all Dave Gettleman's fault for the position he put him in, but they still don't have the cap space in his mind he at least is not confident he can get through the season without doing another restructure, and that's just why he probably didn't want to take on another big contract with a lot of dead cap coming up, like a Brandon Cooks or somebody like that.
I don't even know how they would have fully made that work. And You're right. And you can see every time it gets brought up to Joe Schoen about restructuring, he does not want to do it. So he really wants that 2023 cap to be what it's looking like it could be. But if the Giants suffer some injuries here and you have to sign some guys off the street, man, you're just talking about the cap just getting so much smaller. And that could realistically happen, right? It's just such a tough situation to be in. And it's, dude, I wish, like, what were the odds of the Giants being 6-2?
Yeah,
through 8 games right now.
I think they were 6.5 over/under wins for the season in the preseason.
It's nuts, man. All of these independent factors take away from the fact that the Giants should be 6-2 right now. So many things working against them, yet they still found a way into this position. And here we are still acknowledging how much better this roster can become. Like, there's so much meat on the bone of success for the Giants. Like, they're not even a finalized product. They're not even close to being a finalized product right now, which is another reason why I think I just like the fact that they're trusting the process and then just taking every game as it comes to them, one by one, and they're not going to overreact.
Yep, you nailed that. And I think one thing that was interesting he brought up, when Odell Beckham Jr. did visit the Giants a few weeks ago, Joe Schoen was not any part of that. He said, I was not any part of that. But he did say, if the player wants to be here, I would entertain the idea of bringing in Odell Beckham. He said, I like what I've seen on tape from him. The only thing is, as we went back to just now, if he's already talking about not feeling confident about even getting through the season without having to restructure and create cap space, I just don't know how they're going to find any cap space for a player like Odell Beckham, because Odell Beckham is not coming in on a vet min deal. He expects to be paid a certain amount for the product he can offer. So I would be, even like if you look at what he's talked about in the past, like it's not like he's just going to come in vet min. That's fine. I want to play for the Giants. So it would be interesting when Beckham starts to look at teams. It'll be like December, I think I've read now, but I just don't know how they're going to find the cap space.
No, neither do I. Wouldn't it be something though, like something written in Hollywood, if Odell Beckham Jr. comes back to the New York Giants, the Giants go on like a Super Bowl run?
Yeah, that would be
and
insane.
Like he returns and he's like, getting like 10 catches every game and just absolutely dominating. How awesome that would be.
Yeah, it would be incredible. I don't want to rule it out. Joe Schoen didn't rule it out, certainly, but at the same time, they're going to have to find some cap space. So we'll see what happens there. I thought it was interesting that he talked about how they have like a staff with top 100 college players that they're looking at, and they have 10 players. They give 10 players to each person on their staff, and he gets an update each week from that staff member on those 10 players. And he's planning to actually see, I think he said he's planning to attend and watch all 100 of those players.
Yeah, those are the top 100 players in terms of what the New York Giants views them as. So each scout, and I guess, has 10 players right now, and they definitely still have the guys who are in their region as well. So that's probably an ever evolving type of list. And, I'm sure it's going to be well more than 100 players by the time the draft ends up kind of coming up, because guys are going to fall, guys are going to rise and what have you. And I think they're going to have a really comprehensive type of breakdown on these players, which is exciting because that's what we want. We don't want replications of what happened at the back end of the Jerry Reese era, where they were taking Eli Apple and they never even talked to the kid pre-draft, which is just wild.
Just a panic move there. After they got traded, after Leonard Floyd, they wanted I believe it was Leonard Floyd at the time.
Leonard Floyd and Jack Conklin, and they both got sniped right before them.
Well, Floyd the Bears traded from 11 to 9 to get ahead of the Giants, and I have on record, I wasn't supposed to bring this, but I've said it before, and I'll just say it again. I once got a chance to interview John Fox, and he said we made that trade because we knew the Giants were going to take Leonard Floyd. So clearly there were leaks in the old Giants organization. Hopefully that's not the case still moving forward. I don't think it was, because they did a really good job, the Giants, of keeping Kayvon Thibodeau under wraps. Even in the Peter Schragger interview, he talked about how he went to breakfast with Joe Schoen like just before the draft, and Joe Schoen gave him a completely different answer of who he was interested in at 5. And that's why Schragger in his mock got the Giants pick so wrong. And it was just so interesting to hear, like, Joe Schoen, even to his friends, like, he's friends with Peter Schragger, and he's just like, screw this, I'm giving a fake answer. In his head, he's like, not going to leak this. So I think the Giants have sealed up those leaks, hopefully, because draft's going to be everything for this GM. We've learned that now. Again, they're up to 9 picks, probably going to get to 11. They didn't trade any of these picks. Instead, they traded 4 picks with the Kadarius Toney trade. It's going to be a draft team. It's going to be a team that builds to the draft. As he said, Parcells told him a while ago when he worked for Bill Parcells in Miami, the quickest way for a head coach to get fired is not developing young talent. And he said both him and Brian Daboll are on the same page there.
I mean, yeah, look at the 2022 draft class right now. Even some of Dave Gettleman's draft picks, who's still technically young talent, they're getting a lot out of guys like O'Shane Zimenez and players like that. So it makes a lot of sense. And I really think Brian Daboll, and Joe Schoen said this in the press conference as well, has just done such an excellent job developing his coaching staff and bringing in the right coaching staff to develop a lot of these young players. If you look at this coaching staff, I mean, there are a lot of studs there. And I think that's a big reason why the Giants have 6 wins.
Yeah, you nailed it. All right, that's all we have for today on the Big Blue Banter podcast. Nick has got to get out of here and pick up his parents, as he should. This is our reaction to the Joe Schoen presser, to the trade deadline news. We're on board with it. It is what it is. Deal with it, as they like to say. Look, the Giants have a long-term plan, so don't worry so much about what happens now in the short term. Would be my final takeaway there. So anyway, have a great rest of your week. Go Giants, and we'll talk to you soon.